Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Sasha, and I'll be your host for today. It's really good to be sitting on this side of the screen today because normally I'm actually sat where our producer Zoe is, making sure that all the tech stuff is all working fine. But today is actually my first time hosting a webinar, so please be kind. So if you're joining us today, it's probably because you're finding a few snags with hybrid working. Of course, since the pandemic, we've had to shift the way we work dramatically, and I suppose some of the decisions we've had to make could have been quite reactive and in response to external factors. I think it's safe to say, though, that things have settled down a little bit more, and if you're like us, you might actually be going into the office 2 or 3 days a week. But what happens on those other days? Do you find it challenging to try and collaborate with your teams while working remotely? Do you feel like there's security issues as a result of working from personal laptops or even on your own Wi-Fi? It's really important to be flexible in this kind of hybrid world that we're living in, but also it's important to be efficient. So to address some of these challenges and offer some solutions, our speaker Ben Vanderberg from Adobe will be providing you with some top tips and tools on how to make hybrid working more effective, safe, and efficient for your organization. I'll let Ben introduce himself in just a little bit, but first I just want to run through some housekeeping rules. So closed captions are available. Just press the CC button, and if you encounter any issues, give our producer Zoe a shout on the chat. Speaking of the chat, we'd love for you to make the most of it and speak to one another. If you want right now, I know someone already has. You can share with us what charity you're from, where you're tuning in from. Obviously, the nature of remote working means sometimes we get people from all over the world, which is really lovely to see. Also, feel free to actually kind of put some of your own stories of perhaps some pain points that you found from working remotely or working hybrids, and if actually you see any other messages in the chat that you think, oh, I've got the solution for that, just pop it in. It's really lovely to sort of hear from each other, learn from one another. These are what we're all about. So also, we'd love to know any questions that you might have about the topic, or any that you might have for Ben during the session. If you do want to ask any, just pop them in the Q&A function and not the chat. So one of my colleagues says it's kind of like two chat diagrams over each other. By keeping it there, it means that we can keep track of what questions are coming in, and then we'll ask them at the end to Ben. So lastly, the webinar is being recorded, so you'll get an email once the recording is ready, which is usually in about 1 week's time, and these will also be ready with the slides and any resources mentioned today. If you have any tech issues, feel free to message our lovely producer Zoe. I will also mention that, of course, myself, Ben, and Zoe are actually working from home. So, if there are any Wi-Fi issues or potential cats or family members walking into the screen, well, at least I've warned you. If there are Wi-Fi issues or technical issues on our side, myself or Zoe will jump in and try and keep you entertained whilst we sort those out. But that's enough from me. I'll come on at the end to ask any questions for Ben. But for now, Ben, if you're ready, I'll hand over to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Sasha, and thank you for everyone having me here today. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. It's something that's very near and dear to my heart, and it looks like many of you are tuning in from a lot of different places. I just look at them and look at it as my travel list at some point in time when I get to go travel around. A lot of the things that places on that list, Edinburgh and others, are ones that are on my short list. All right, so as part of the introduction today, I'll talk to you a little bit about who I am and some of my background, but we're going to walk through some introductions, and I'm going to talk about some of today's challenges with hybrid work, and then I'm going to give you 8 tips to walk away with to help address some of those challenges. And at the end, we will have plenty of time for Q&A for any of your questions. So again, feel free to drop into the Q&A pod any of your questions, and I really look forward to hearing some of those. So to give you a little bit of background about me, I'm Ben Vanderberg. I'm principal platform evangelist for our Adobe Document Cloud here at Adobe. Some of the tools that you might be familiar coming from that set of solutions are things like Adobe Acrobat for all your PDF needs, Adobe Sign, as well as things like our developer platforms. I'm also a contributing editor to our tech blogs, our Adobe tech blog. After this, I always love hearing from people. So feel free to follow on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook, or go check out some of the things over on the tech blog. So with that, what I'd love everybody to do is take a moment right now and think about 2 years ago, because I think there's a lot of things that have changed for many of us in different ways. The first thing is that I know for myself, I'm not having as many in-person meetings as I did 2 years ago. I've had entire teams, aside from 3 people on my team out of a team of like 15 people, all of them, except for 3, were joined in the last couple of years, and I haven't met them in person. But I have great relationships with all of them by working remotely over screen sharing, like Zoom today. That's a big shift in the way that we interact with each other. Along with that, a lot of the tools that you kind of expect every day, especially if you go into the office every day, those changed a lot in 2 years. When you're in the office, you had certain things that you were comfortable having. Maybe a printer that was in the corner that you could just walk over, scan something or print something. Well, when everybody shifted home and having to work from home, access to those type of tools or access to pens and things in the closet, those are a lot harder to come by because everybody is in a different situation at home. Along with that, in person having to, there's a lot of things that you end up having to sign, grants, agreements, and all sorts of things. And in person a couple of years ago, that might have been a very convenient thing of walking over to your colleague or to your manager and asking for them to sign on that piece of paper, walking over to another person and signing. And that becomes very convenient. Then when we shift forward 2 years, that's actually been a little bit more difficult because you don't want to have to put that in the post in order for someone to sign, because that extends the amount of time a whole lot more. And so people have been shifting to more electronic technologies like electronic signatures. And a lot of times when working in the office, similar to like the printers and other facilities, if you have things like paper files or file shares on your computer that you were typically accessing when you were just in the office, getting access to those became more difficult, especially at the rate of all of us having to work from home. And even if we maybe had access to those things, it also was difficult because they weren't geared and designed for us to be able to access from anywhere. They're geared and designed for us to work in the office. And there's also something that I've also seen as a shift where organizations needed to focus and think a lot about security, because when you were in the office, you could just assume you lock the doors to the office and a lot of things are secure in there. But you have everybody, when they're working from home and in a hybrid work environment, they might be using maybe personal devices. They might be working in laptops, and some areas are more secure than others, which for an IT person gives a little bit of heartburn, as you might have some concerns about some of that sensitive information, some of that personally identifiable information, or PII, and so forth. So the reality that we see is that hybrid work is here to stay. People have had a lot of experience over the last couple of years being able to learn how to work from home, and some people love it and thrive on it because it allows you to be able to focus. Some people still like coming into the office, but they like some of the flexibility of being able to work from home on occasion and go in on occasion. But some of the statistics that we worked with 451 Research to see was that the conclusions were 51% of workers would prefer more flexible hours. So that coming into the office every single day, 9 to 5, 8 to 5, is something that is changing, and the expectations of what people can do is changing, because also that is something that the last couple of years has proven people can be productive and have that flexibility. And this isn't just when you talk about things like we hear things around the Great Resignation, where people are switching jobs right now a lot. We've seen that 73% are willing to switch jobs to have more control and have that flexibility in their schedule. And 1 in 2 workers would leave their job for better tools, because if you don't have the tools to enable them for that flexible work, whether they're at home, whether they're in the office, then that slows them down, prevents them from being able to get their work done effectively, to collaborate effectively. And when you're in that situation, 1 in 2 workers would look at finding alternatives. So some of the obstacles in that landscape that we've seen are things like security limitations. As people were looking at some of these new technologies to address, many of us adopted these technologies extremely quickly because, well, we had a pandemic. We needed to address this very quickly. So we chose the tools that address the need quickly. But some of these maybe shorten some of the cycles of figuring out things like security. Some of the obstacles that we also see from this new landscape is there's a lot of different information silos. A lot of systems might have been local within an office, that connecting those together to make those more streamlined for hybrid work becomes challenging. Along with that, we've also seen that many apps, I know for myself, I have probably like 20 tabs in my web browser open at any given time. And I might have a bunch of other applications open on my desktop. And a lot of times these applications don't integrate together, which means that I'm jumping between one, copying and pasting them into another application, and so forth and so forth. We've also seen that it can be sometimes difficult collaborating in certain ways. There's some really, really cool tools out there for collaborating, things like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and there's other tools that allow you to be able to whiteboard and stuff like that. But the challenge that I've seen a lot of is collaborating in a natural way in this new landscape requires sometimes some new muscles for people. And along with that, there's just sometimes straight up so many different apps that we have to work on a daily basis that it also creates somewhat a drain, because people are constantly having to learn these new tools and they don't always get the opportunity to slow down and work and get their work done as the world's constantly changing. So from the aspects of day to day, what we see is that one, engagements, more and more, the culture is changing to be digital first, to accommodate more of this hybrid workplace, so that the expectation a couple of years ago, the amount of time I spent on camera talking to people was probably 5% in comparison to the amount that I spend today. And because of that expectation, people being more accommodating for that hybrid work, things are becoming more and more digital first within a culture. The second thing that we're seeing is that workplace is becoming more hybrid. More flexibility is coming to workers where they can work from home They can come into the office. Some are going to the direction of being entirely working from home. Some are doing more of a hybrid workplace. But the reality is that regardless, there's becoming more flexibility and more hybrid work. And also what we're seeing is there's been a huge amount of interesting innovation that's been happening in the last 2 years, where there's a lot of digital experiences that are coming out today that are helping people be more productive, helping people collaborate more, and creating better experiences that, if we look back, may have not been as great in the good old days before we went more hybrid, but it's creating new ways that we're collaborating. So to help address many of these, I'm going to give you 8 tips. 8 tips for helping you go on your journey of digital document transformation. And as you look through these, some of these you might already be doing today. You might, for example, I know every single one of you are on Zoom, so I know that you're using video conferencing and so forth. But we're going to focus on some of the digital document transformation tools that you can use and those tips to help you. So if you know some of these, awesome, you're on the right track. And if you're earlier on in your journey, then these are a few, you might have a few more takeaways that will help you here. So the first thing is, when I think of the way that businesses need to look at their strategy, especially with becoming digital first and with their documents, I look at it in 3 different areas. One, you have the modern workplace productivity, which is the tools that help me work every single day. I open it up, it does something for me, and it makes my life easier. The second area is document automation. How can I take a lot of those redundant manual tasks that I do and make them something that can be automated and work for me? And then the third area is, how do we take the burden of paper and work and integrate that into everyday how people interact, like when people come to your charity website or people come to different applications, how can you have more connected experiences? And each of these different tips are going to touch on some of these different areas. So let's first look at some of the tips around modern workplace. So tip number 1, empower employees with tools for digital first culture. Now, this might seem like a simple thing, but it's not just technology. You can't just apply technology to people. It's building a culture that is digital first. It's making sure that the expectation of digital first is within that culture, and making the tools available to be able to cultivate that culture. Now, things like Microsoft Teams, Zoom are all great tools, but also I see a lot of people using things like Microsoft 365 and storing their documents online and being able to collaborate live in real time, or things like Google Workplace, where you can collaborate in real time. And there's a zillion other tools that have been around for a while, and even some new ones in the last year that have been really cool. One of my favorites very recently is Miro, which is a whiteboarding tool that allows you to be able to collaborate on your on interactive whiteboards in real time. And as someone who loves to draw, someone who loves to use his hands and express things and draw things on boards, being able to do that digitally has opened me up to open up my creativity and open up the way that we think and collaborate, even though my team is spread all across the United States. The second tip is provide tools that empower them to be paperless and work smarter. Paper tends to be the bottleneck in a lot of different processes, because in order to maybe work with someone remotely, you either have to use maybe like FedEx or UPS to send that over, or the post. You need to maybe scan that you need to send that to them, which over email, that takes time. There's also a lot of fidelity that's lost in paper because when you bring it back into digital, you have to use things like optical character recognition, and depending on the quality of the scan, it's not always a great transition. So as much as you can, try to encourage people to use digital first technologies. If you don't have to print it, then don't print it. And this opens up a lot of ways that you can work and collaborate smarter because you're not creating that friction in that process. So a couple of examples of things are things like Adobe Scan is a free app for your smartphone that allows you to be able to take a picture of any of your things, and it turns it into a PDF. It OCRs it so that it's searchable PDF that you can then share with somebody. That's a really helpful tool so that you're quickly eliminating some of that friction by being able to scan something and share that with everybody else. Another example that I know is that I have some colleagues that love to spend a lot of time at the copy machine, and they would print out a whole bunch of different papers, and they would collate, add and remove different pages and staple them all together and provide them out in meetings. And you can do that in a digital way. Things like Adobe Acrobat DC allows you to be able to combine multiple PDFs, Word, and all those documents together. So you have one document you can share out to everybody so that you're not having to have that email of like 15 different documents at one time for people to open up. You can combine those together. You can cherry pick and add and remove the different pages so that you have the relevant things, and it's all digital. Another thing is that people are a lot of times are under the assumption that when it's a PDF, you can't edit that document. And especially when a PDF is the only copy of a document that you have, you might have some last minute changes. And so being able to edit a PDF is something that you can do in Acrobat so that those last minute changes of your PDFs, you can easily change quickly and easily without having to go through a whole mess. And the other nice thing about that is that you can even take your PDFs that maybe you only have a PDF, you can convert that back into a Word or PowerPoint or Excel file so that you can reuse the content that you have, especially if that's the only copy of that document that you have. The other thing that is also really, really changing how people work and interact is electronic signatures, and being able to capture signatures so that I'm not having to wait for a person to receive a package to sign or print that out, sign it, and scan it back in. Electronic signatures with things like Adobe Sign are allowing you to be able to capture route documents to one or many parties for them to sign. And from there, you can then, whether you're on a desktop computer or you're on a mobile device, you can choose where you want different parties to sign on a document. You can even set things like their name, their date, so a person's not signing in the wrong spot. You can even set things like form field information. And when you send that out, person doesn't have to wait to go back and find a printer to print it out, sign it, and scan it back in. They could be right on their mobile device. They can click on a link. It opens up within their web browser for them to easily click to view and sign right on their device. And this means that you could get a document back and signed by all different parties in a matter of minutes, hours, rather than days and weeks. Along with that, it gives you much more visibility. I don't know how many times I've sent something to somebody in email, maybe as an attachment. Hey, can you please sign this? And it goes into this black void where you can't see whether they've even viewed it, whether they've signed it, whether there's any issues. Or maybe it's just stuck in their inbox and they haven't even looked at it. You don't know that. But by using e-signatures, what this allows you to do is also gives you the visibility to know when something was sent to somebody, when it was viewed, when it was signed, which also gives you additional benefits because it allows you to do things like set automated reminders. So you don't yourself have to send that follow-up email. That could be automatic to make sure that we get those signatures signed in timely manner so we can go on with business. And then one other concern a lot of times is things like fraud, or making sure that the person is who they say they are, or this document is legitimate. And so by using electronic signatures rather than just something that you draw on your signature on a piece of paper, it gives you additional information to know who that person is, know that it's a certified document, and it gives you the history step by step to know exactly what happened, when it was viewed, when it was signed, when it was created, and so forth. So tip number 3, security is everybody's responsibility, but let's also give employees the tools to be responsible. And this has multiple facets to it. There's the devices that people are using to log in to do their work. It's where those documents are being stored, whether that's something on their desktop computer or something on a remote drive, or on like Microsoft SharePoint or Google Docs. Making sure that you provide the tools so people can securely store those documents in there is extremely important. But the other thing is what about those documents and making sure that no one's changing those documents or there isn't any fraud? Contrary to popular belief, PDFs are not read-only. You can actually edit a PDF in tools like Adobe Acrobat, where you can go in, and if we had like these hours here, we could easily go in and change this this value to, instead of 6,000 hours, 10,000 hours, and that could run into a whole issue of compliance. And especially if we assume that the PDF is not editable, then how would we know there? Well, inside a PDF, there actually are tools to allow you to be able to give your employees a way to protect those documents, to make sure that they can't, that it can't change, or you can identify if someone manipulated that change. So for example, inside of Acrobat, you can go in and choose protect or encrypt, and you can encrypt that with a certificate or a password, and you can choose what people are allowed to do, whether they're allowed to print, whether they're allowed to make any changes or add comments to that document. You can set that granular control to make sure that the content is protected. So the next time someone tries to go in and change that document, what's going to happen is it's going to prompt them to put in their password or have a certificate to make sure that it can't be changed. Tip number 4, encourage employees to embrace tools that help empower digital collaboration remotely. Well, we're already on the right step talking over video on Zoom today. Other tools like Microsoft Teams is a great tool. I know many people use Slack and so forth. But a couple of things that I've also found is that more and more people are also working inside these tools to collaborate. And these platforms are also finding ways to have apps that you can work inside of these, and not just like screen sharing. But the other thing is that especially with documents, I know a lot of times people are sending emails back and forth to each other in order for them to review. And I also still have people that print them out, red line them with a pen, scan them back in, drives me up the wall. But one of the things that you can do is, because when you're in a digital place, you can collaborate remotely in real time on your documents. People do that with Microsoft Word online. They do that with Google Docs collaboratively while they're working to create a document. But when you have a PDF, what do you do then? Well, you can do this also in real time similarly, where you can share that so people can receive a link to be able to open up and view that. And whether they're on the desktop or on their phone, they can add comments on that document. So if I'm on my phone here, I can open up that document in Acrobat Reader on my phone, and I can use the commenting tools to see the comments that people have filled out. I can reply to those comments, and that way I'm not having to wait to get to a bigger screen in order to add any of my feedback. This gives much more flexibility for people so that while you're on the go, you can provide that feedback on any of those documents. And one of the great things about things like PDF is you don't have to be stuck to a specific application to create a PDF, because you could create it from just about anything under the sun. You can output a PDF, but you can then use these types of tools to collaborate in real time on that to get feedback. So the next thing is also there are great ways that you can work with documents and collaborate and get that information without having to force that on somebody else. So for example, let's say I'm working on an agreement here. Someone sends me their revisions to an agreement. They only send it to me in a PDF document. All right, fine. But I want to know what changed between that first version and the second version of that. And in Microsoft Word, we have tools like Review, where you can track changes on that. But you can also do that with PDFs, where you can compare two different PDF files, and it can give you a report to know what has changed between those documents, what's been added, what's been removed. And this isn't just with text, it's also with images or placement of things. So it can give you very clear ideas of what changed between those different versions in there. And that becomes really helpful because it empowers you to be much more productive, even if you do have people that are still providing copies over email, or you don't have control of how they're working and interacting. This is particularly helpful when you're working with third parties outside your organization. Tip number 5, expect tools that are accommodating for everyone in the digital world. Now, when I say everyone, I mean everybody. Everybody from people with disabilities, like visual disabilities. I mean everyone. And one of the challenges that we've heard from people is particularly because we're not just in a paper world today. Now we have, and we're not just in a computer world today either. We have computers, we have mobile devices, we have tablets, we have paper. All of these are different formats. And with phones being more popular, one of the challenges that I've really seen is that when you have something that looks like a piece of paper, you have to pinch and zoom to try to read that content. That becomes much more difficult. So we've been working with a number of different experts to make that much easier from a day-to-day working with PDFs, but also as it relates to things like e-learning. And it's a tool, and it's freely available with an Acrobat Reader on your phone. It's called Liquid Mode. And what it does is this, say, resume on this phone is somewhat difficult to read because you have to pinch and zoom to try to read that document. But what it can do instead is it analyzes the document, and it will reflow your PDF into something that you can easily view right on your device. It understands the structure of the PDF, so you can do things like navigate, and it'll know all the different headers and so forth. But it can also give you your own reading settings. And this is really important because some people need text to be really big. Some people need to separate the the spacing, but you can create your own preference of a reading order so that you have much less fatigue going through and reading any of your documents on a mobile device. I think this is really helpful to provide more flexibility for everybody, so you're not having to pinch and zoom, but in particular for people who struggle with visual disabilities, it also makes it easier because it helps be more accommodating in there. But we also have a responsibility for making sure that all of the PDFs, say, that we post on our website are accommodating for people who use things like screen readers. And so one tip that I would say to everybody is, before you publish anything, make sure you put your PDFs through Accessibility Checker. Not every PDF is created equal. Some applications make PDFs that are awesome for accessibility. Some don't do as well. So making sure that you have an accessibility checker go through and make sure that it is proper, or there aren't accessibility issues, can go a long way of making your content more accessible and available for everybody. Now, this is a whole journey. For many people, this is something that takes time, but it's important to get into the culture and the plan of your digital documents, because it really does help everyone be more accommodating in this modern world. So the other thing in tip number 6 is bring the tools to where people work every day. I don't want to have 15 different applications or 15 different tabs. I want to work with my digital documents where I'm working. And this has been something that at Adobe, we've been really, really focusing on that philosophy. For example, inside of Microsoft Teams, we've made it available so that directly inside of there, you can share a PDF with somebody that you maybe have stored in SharePoint here. And without having to leave the conversation, you can open that up and you can collaborate and add, comment, and review on that in real time with everybody else in that conversation. And it saves all that back into SharePoint, which is awesome. That means that it is almost like being in person and both scribbling at the same time to give that feedback in it, but it accelerates getting that feedback from everybody. Another example is similarly being able to do that from whatever application you're using, whether that's Teams or say like Microsoft SharePoint or Google Docs. It's about being able to take any of your documents, be able to comment, annotate, highlight, and review those with your colleagues, regardless of what applications you're working in, and not having to leave those applications in order to do that. Now, Adobe has a really tight partnership with Microsoft. And so what we've been doing is working really hard to take all of our different tools from Adobe Sign, Acrobat, PDF Services, Creative Cloud, and making them available within all the different applications within Microsoft 365, so that we're bringing the tools to where people work every single day. But I encourage you to also look and have that as something to think about as you're choosing some of your technologies. Think about how they integrate and play well with other applications, because it does make it much easier for people to be able to get their work done by working in the tools. Plus, it also makes it easier for them because they don't have to learn all new applications. They can work within the context of the applications that they're using already. Tip number 7, leverage low-code tools to help automate common tasks. I don't know how many times I've had scenarios where I just have to get through this. I just have to work through, and it's just repetitive tasks, one after another. Maybe it's combining things together. Maybe it's putting things into a spreadsheet. That is just very redundant manual tasks. And this brings us to that area of document automation. Now, a lot of people are getting into things like robotic process automation, or RPA. And there's also business process automation. And being able to use those types of tools to be able to automate some of those common tasks. So you're not having to have an application open on your computer and you're clicking those buttons all day. What if we can have the computers do that automatically for us, or based on triggers of what we do within our applications? And one of the ways that we've been working on this with Microsoft is integrating into what's called Microsoft Power Automate, which is their low-code workflow automation tool in Microsoft 365. So any of your PDF and e-signature tasks, you can put in line with the rest of this workflow. And what this workflow is describing is basically when I drop a file into SharePoint, we want it to convert a PDF into a Word document and then send an email notification to somebody. A couple of easy steps, and we might do that over and over and over again. But this could help do this automatically. And the important thing is I'm not using a developer in order to do that. I am just configuring that in there. And this whole area of low code opens up a whole bunch of possibilities for you to automate a lot of tasks within how you work every day, so that people can spend less time on the busy work and more on the work that requires time and thought, and to take some of that busy work and let some of the flows do that instead. Then the tip number 8, and this is my final tip: don't pass the burden of paperwork to your customers. In an ideal scenario, we would love to take the paper and the work out of paperwork. And unfortunately, a lot of times we pass a lot of that to our clients or our customers. And that means that whether it's someone downloads a PDF on the website and then they have to print to fill it out, sign it, scan it, send it back in, or send it in the post. Or it might be that you have something that someone's required to come in to an office in order to complete. There's better ways that you can easily and without doing a huge amount of effort integrate this online onto your websites, so that people can have electronic processes, but also you're not having to, say, rekey information and so forth. So one example, this is something that Adobe Sign can do, is what's called a web form. And it allows you to basically take any of your Word or PDF or any other documents, you drop that into Adobe Sign, you place the fields of where you want to put those fields, and basically then you can either put a link or embed that experience onto your website, so a person can see the document and they can fill out all of the things that they need in the document easily. And the other great thing about this is that they can electronically sign the document, and you can also set things like validation on the document to make sure that you're not having to go back and forth with that person to make sure that they're putting in the proper information. That's so often the case when you're using manual processes. You're having to follow up because someone signed in the wrong spot or they skipped a field. Making that much easier for people to do online is huge. Makes it easier for them because they don't have to go someplace else. Makes it easier for you because you're getting that information more reliably. The other benefit of this is also, it means you can use this not just on the documents that you create and design yourself, but especially when you have documents that come from a third party that that you don't have control, you're not going to go edit and change those forms. You can still turn those into interactive web forms people can easily fill out and sign. And then for any of your PDFs that exist on a website, you can easily embed those onto a web page instead of having people have to download them onto your computer in order to view that, because you get zero visibility, you get zero control of if people are having issues viewing those PDFs or anything like that. You have an easy way to keep that consistency. Also makes your website look look more pristine. And it also gives you the opportunity to have more interactivity on your website. As if you get more sophisticated, you can add those same like commenting and annotation tools into there, or you can even add things like those annotations could be a way for someone to communicate if they have certain issues back to your organization to follow up. But this becomes a really great tool for being able to take any of your PDF content. You don't have to redesign it for the website. You can drop it right onto your page. So in summary, 8 tips to help you have your foundational tools and checklists for digital document transformation, to help you create that digital first culture and help you be able to better collaborate and create a more secure environment and open up ways that you can become more efficient through automation and create those great online experiences for your clients as well. So that's all I had for today. Thank you for coming. I'd like to pass it back to Sasha for Q&A, and also I welcome anybody to feel free to follow, connect on any of the social media platforms there.
Great, thank you so much, Ben. Wonderful. Well, we've got a bit of time for some questions, and we have had quite a few questions come through. Also, apologies, it's just gotten really dark here, so, you know, bear with the lighting. So let's start off with Chris's question. So I think Adobe Sign looks great, but if we have one document that gets sent out by any member of a large team, does each team member need to have their own Adobe Sign license to send this out with their name and receive it directly? Essentially, is there a way to have a team license that everyone can access and send out the one document, if that makes sense?
That's an awesome question. It's a very common question. So when you send a document out for signature using Adobe Sign, the person who needs to be licensed is the person sending the document, not the signers. And this is a big, important differentiation because you don't want to set that burden of like, all right, for everybody to be able to sign, everybody has to go, purchase this license, and everyone has to log into this. You don't have to do that. Adobe Sign gives you basically you send it, the person receives an email with a link, a unique link to them to click to view to sign, and that validates that their email address is their identity, their first level of identity. But you can, if you want to be extra sure that they are who they say they are, there's also additional levels of identity verification that you can set, things like government ID verification, where they have to scan maybe their driver's license or their passport, phone verification, and many others. So that makes it much easier for you because you can have a license. You can send out those documents to sign, but every person who needs to sign doesn't have to have an account. You just have to have a license as a sender.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ben. We actually do have another question on licenses from Jenny. So Jenny says, all these different products, so Adobe for Teams, Adobe for 365, essentially when you were saying you can integrate different technology there, are all these separate licenses based on the number of licenses held for 365, or is there kind of a one package price? Jenny says, this all sounds a bit expensive.
Yeah, all sounds a bit expensive. Well, fortunately, Jenny, it's actually much simpler than that because there's some of the tools are actually free. So like Adobe Scan is free. You can install it on your phone and you can use that. Adobe Acrobat, when you license Adobe Acrobat, that not just gives you access to Adobe Acrobat, but any of the Adobe Acrobat integrations into Teams and any of those types of things are all included as part of your licensing there. So you can leverage that inside of that. Now, for things like Adobe Sign, it depends on the licensing that you're needing of how much you need integrations versus if you just or you need to use it as a team, or if it's just an individual. There are some individual licenses that depending on things can be included as part of Acrobat, or something that we have like enterprise level licensing for some more integration type of things there. But for the most part, for most scenarios, especially when people are starting out, they should just need one license to Adobe Acrobat. And it should get you some of those controls, unless you need some of those more elevated enterprise tools.
Great, thank you. So we've actually got a couple questions on kind of translation functions.
Yeah.
So one is from Adrian saying, are there any translation functions to make documents accessible for clients before signing?
Okay, so there's a few things on this front. From a UI perspective on our side, on the Adobe side, we support like what 35 different languages on the user interface and the sending interface and everything, so that even if like I'm sending a document to someone who speaks German, hello, then it is then the user interface for them, the email address, the email that they receive is in German, even though I might speak English. However, the actual content of the document, we don't do any translations ourselves. And I don't think you'd actually want us to do that, at least in an automated way. You probably would want to go make sure that there wasn't something lost in translation. And I encourage this, even with a lot of translation tools that exist out there, you want to go double check that, especially if it's things like agreements that people are going to sign, because the last thing that you want to do is come back and go, I didn't realize it meant that in German.
Well, yes, yeah. So I suppose that answers the question from Jenny saying, are there any translation functionalities for Welsh? Which...
I don't think so. I haven't checked. I don't think so, but that's a really good question.
It's a good question. Thank you, Jenny. So Trisha, you obviously spoke about accessibility, making sure that the tech is inclusive. So we've got a question from Trisha saying, I have a blind employee who struggles with documents that have graphs, tables, etc. How can she overcome this? And she actually uses Teams. This is a really interesting question, I find, because it is obviously something we all need to think about. How can we make things more inclusive, especially using digital? So if you have any words of wisdom, Ben, that would be fantastic.
It is a journey. We as a society have not 100% solved this. We're slowly getting better. There are some tools that we definitely do to help kind of auto tag things so that you can do graphs, tables, and documents. But one of the challenges that you run into with graphs and tables and stuff is that a lot of the automated systems, even like AIs and stuff, lose a lot of the context of those graphs, where you're going to, because what you actually want to describe in this graph, you could describe a graph and say there is a line going from 0 to 50 on this. What you want to actually describe is the context. Sales have grown in the last 2 years, as shown in this graph from 1990 to 1992 or something like that. And the problem is that a lot of automated tools can help you, describe visually what that is, but the context ends up being lost. So there's a combination that you can do together where some of those tools can help, but there's also responsibility on the content creator to make sure that they create the tools that are accessible, that are remediated to provide that information in things like screen readers. As a society, we generally need to do a better job of that. But it's a journey with technology to help that.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. I mean, Trisha did put another question in saying, working with disabled employees, there are a number of problems with using scanning and updating, especially when updating documents. Teams 365, for example, it allows you to edit a document, but it doesn't actually prompt via voice for blind people. So again, if you've got any ideas to share, or if you feel your previous answer kind of was there as well.
Microsoft has been extremely progressive in a lot of their accommodation for people who are disabled, like really impressively. But it's also not an easy thing to do, especially when it comes to scans and stuff like that. There's so many variables of what goes wrong. Like if you had a horrible scanner or was low quality, that then the computer it reads it as an E instead of an A or something like that. That seems something small, but it can be part of a bigger problem. I think there's a lot of proactive things that I would encourage you to do. Is one, try to find as much of the process that you can eliminate scanning, because scanning always creates that burden. Or if you do have to have scanning, then you might want to have a team that is remediating those documents to make them accessible, to review those, to be more accommodating. So there's no silver bullet, especially when it becomes with anything with accessibility. We're getting better with some of the automation tools, but there isn't a silver bullet.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we have a question from Kaya. I hope that's how you pronounce your name. So can you protect Adobe scans? I don't know if that question needs a little bit more to it or not, or if that makes sense for you.
Yes. This was actually something that we added to Adobe Scan earlier this year, was the ability for you to protect your documents that you scan in your PDFs. You can do that right on your mobile device. Otherwise, you could always take that scan document to open that up in Acrobat on your computer, but it's now available on your mobile device.
Amazing. Great. So we have a slightly longer question from David. I think David's really interested to get your thoughts on this. So from David's discussions with various clients, small businesses and charities, they say that their top 5 hybrid working challenges are cybersecurity and compliance, efficient operations and processes, worker and volunteer exhaustion, shared values, engagement, motivation, and board leadership efficiency. So is there anything that you feel stands out there that you feel really resonates with you? Like, yeah, cybersecurity and compliance is really difficult in the world of hybrid working.
I think those 5 points are really, really good points. Cybersecurity and compliance are definitely ones, because not only do you have just like the straight up IT and security, you also have a lot of things that have been like compliance rules or legislation that explicitly assumed things like paper, or assumed things like you were in person, that have been very eye-opening in the last couple of years, where people go, actually, maybe we need to modernize some of these policies or some of these changes. And we've been seeing that change a lot in government. We've been seeing that, we've been seeing it in education, in financial services, basically across the board. Especially in regulated type of areas. I think it's been a wake-up call for the legislation side and how people actually work. If you're going by the book, is that actually something that meets the way that people work in a modern way? One example that I see is things like in the pharmaceutical industry. There's a compliance called 21 CFR Part 11. Yes, I've spent a lot of time that I can say that whole word. It was written in like 1998 or something like that. Well, that is a whole big change in how people are working. Back then, the security expectations that people had were different. The security that we have built into our applications were different. So there's a lot of those changes that have changed. Otherwise, some of those other those priorities like efficient operations, worker volunteer exhaustion, I definitely know how that feels. I think all of us can empathize with that in the last couple of years. Shared values, engagement, and motivation. Again, that's another thing where it's building the culture that create something that is sustainable for people to be able to do this every day, and not, and maybe realizing people do have digital exhaustion. So, step back on certain things, but also try more creative ways. One of the things that I know for myself, I actually schedule meetings with people that do not, because sometimes you get the back-to-back meetings. I have meetings where I just chat with people like I would have in the water cooler. And that helps me reduce some of that exhaustion, get that excitement and that fun that in a digital world. Now, I've also been working remotely for 8 years. So I've been a little bit more conditioned than a lot of people going through that journey. But I think it is something that all of us, it's a culture change, and it takes time.
Definitely. Thank you, Ben. Really insightful that was. Now, I'm afraid we don't have time. We've hit the 5 o'clock mark. So thank you so much. I know there were a few more kind of comments, questions in there. I know there were a few on accessibility as well. I just want to drop a link into the chat there. I think it's the correct one. It was a session about accessibility, making sure that your marketing is more inclusive, for example. But I think there's some really helpful tips just in general there. So feel free to have a look at that. If you leave, there will be a feedback form that will pop up. We'd love to know some of your thoughts from this webinar. It always helps us to make sure that we're bringing you the best content, making sure we're doing as best we can for you guys. And yeah, I think that's everything. Thank you so much again, Ben. Wonderful session, and I hope a lot of people took some great advice and tips away from it. So thanks so much, everybody, and it's a goodbye from me.
Thank you, everybody.